alongside before we welcome our guest. We're very excited about saying hello to him. In fact, you've probably worked out who he is because the question was about him. It was, which two fighter did Steve Collins, there's the clue, beat to win the middleweight and the super middleweight world titles? The answer for today's second No Googling in partnership with the SD channel is, well, maybe I should ask him. Steve Collins, hello, how are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Do you know the answers to those questions? I'm sure you do.
I didn't hear the question.
Who did you beat? Who did you beat to become WBO middleweight champion of the world?
Well, there was two Chris's, Chris Pyatt and Chris Eubank.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. You've got both of them. How are you?
Great to see you.
Top of the world.
We are. Do you know what?
Great form.
We spoke to you on the phone 3, 4, 5 weeks ago. I can't remember. And I said, as I do when I speak to most people, I'm sort of very excited about speaking to. Can we get you in the studio? And you went, yeah. And I said to my producer, get him in. And the fact that you've turned up today, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much. That's very kind of you.
No, thank you very much for having me in here. This is what got me in here was to be in the company of this man.
People can't see, but you're talking to me.
No. I'm looking at you. I'm talking to him. Andy Townsend, okay, is a footballer who will be of my era and my mindset. The footballers nowadays, I'm not really a fan of football now. But back in your day, and your success and what you've done, I've great admiration for you because you had all the reasons, not the excuses, not to achieve. But what you had then was you had a fighter, a boxer's heart, a fighter's heart.
That's kind of you, mate, to say that.
No, it is because you end up achieving great things. And no disrespect, there's guys out there with a lot of talent, right?
Yeah.
You had talent, but you worked so hard. And you came back from injury and you had everything went against you and you achieved great things.
Oh,
and
thank you, mate.
We were very proud of you wearing the shirt representing
They were good days.
Ireland, yeah.
With Big Jack, weren't they?
And plus, you could drink a pint of Guinness too without taking a breath. That was it.
Are you a big football fan, Steve?
Not really, no. Football started my boxing career. I was no good. So, I played for the school and I was never getting picked. And I looked and said, I could knock the block off everybody in this team.
Yeah.
I'm not. So there's no point me hanging around here. I'll take up something else that suits me because I wasn't good at football.
At what age was that you took up boxing?
Well, my first boxing match when I was 8 years old.
Oh my god!
Non-stop for 25 years. I boxed non-stop till I was 33, and I loved every moment of it. And then when it ended, it was a great relief, and I walked away achieving a lot more than I expected. I wanted to achieve a certain level, but I went beyond that. And then you wake up one morning, the morning you wake up and it's raining and it's cold and it's miserable and it's wet and you don't get up and put your runners on and go out in the cold. Instead you roll over and go back to sleep on the pillow. That's when you know it's over. Yeah. That's when you know the sacrifice.
That's unusual in boxing because having spoken to a lot of boxers that have retired, a lot of them feel the need to get back in the ring years and years after retiring. You never felt that, Paul?
I did. It's a very militant life almost. You're dedicated. I mean, for 25 years, I was on a diet, and everything I planned was where I'm going to train, how I'm going to train, what's next. I used to go out with my mates. They'd all go out. They'd buy a few bottles of cider on a Saturday night. They'd get a few pence together, and they'd get onto the local fields and be drinking. I'd go down and sit with them and have a yogurt and a can of Coke.
Yeah,
and they accepted that. So that's because I was an ambitious and dedicated athlete then. And I had to work really hard. I'm not comparing myself to you, you had more talent than me, but in boxing, I had to really work hard to achieve because, I would get in the ring with guys, amateurs back in the early, with so much ability, and they could make it look so ordinary. And, it was hard to match them, but I used to work really hard and I improved myself through hard work. So it was dedication that got me to where I was. Talent was part of it, but better fighters than me. I'm going off another...
No, it's good. It's interesting, Steve.
Better fighters than me never achieved
anything like what you did.
Anything like I did, and a lot of it was luck as well. So, I achieved great things, but a lot better fighters than me didn't.
How difficult was it for you to walk away from boxing? I think as a sportsman, we all come to that point where that time's up, time's catching up with you. And there are others that are breathing down your neck. And in your business, it's the most ferocious out of the lot. How difficult to walk away from the sport?
It wasn't because I didn't feel good enough to continue on beating who was out there. You always need a goal and ambition and something to achieve. And I felt I'd achieved everything. There was only one thing left for me, and that was the Roy Jones fight. And I wanted that fight. And that's all I wanted. There was a whole batch of young guys coming up.
Right.
I didn't know who they were, had no interest in them. The public didn't know who they were. The last big name out there was Roy Jones, and to me, it was the natural fight to happen because I ruled America. I was US champ. I was the middleweight over there. I returned from the States, and I had to come back to Britain to win a world title, thanks to Nigel Benn.
Yeah.
Who came to America, bashed everybody up, gathered all the belts, and brought him back to England, and left me in America. There was nothing to fight for over there, so I followed him back to the UK. But the only fight for me that I would have hung around for and wanted was Roy Jones, because everybody else, our whole generation, was over. You know, there was just Roy Jones. That was the last fight, and that I went to his house. I travelled to his hometown. I travelled to his house. I sat with his managers, and they confirmed it wasn't going to happen.
Why, Steve? Why?
Oh well, I brought my solicitor, my friend with me, who I grew up with, who came with me, and we sat in Pensacola in a room with his managers, who are part of a legal team who just won one of the biggest lawsuits in America. It was something to do with smoking ban or wherever it was. Anyway, it's gone back a long time. They had so much money, they're so wealthy, and their attitude was, well, it's like their racehorse. We want to keep them winning.
Right.
We don't need this fight because we're making money fighting easier fights, and we're not going to make any more money fighting you. We don't need it. We don't want it, and it's not going to happen. Why should it happen? You want this fight. You want to beat this man. You want to retire. Well, we're looking 10 years ahead.
Yeah.
So we don't need it, and it's not going to happen. So I realised it wasn't going to happen.
You nearly had the fight, or I say nearly. From what I read, you were about 42, and the fight was being talked about again. Yeah.
Well, listen. Since I retired, when I was retired, you know, everybody wanted to fight me, but there was talk about it. There was talk about me fighting Nigel Benn as well. That's just a bit of publicity. You kind of jump on the bandwagon, but in reality, when I walked away, the relief that came off my shoulders, and I came home, you know, to my family. You know, I had a family, but they were almost secondary to everything. I was committed to boxing, so my family became secondary. So I realized, you know, my kids are growing up. I'm successful. I'm financially successful. I've done well in the game. People respect me in the game. I want to come home and enjoy my family.
Yeah.
I want to live life now because I'm healthy, and I've achieved more than most people have. And I thought, you know what, I quit at the top. But the Roy Jones fight wasn't going to happen. So when I woke up the next, you know, I was actually in Los Angeles, and that's when I started to realize I'm skipping training. I'm not dedicated. I'm taking shortcuts. Why am I in this? What am I doing here?
Right.
Roy Jones is not going to happen. Without that fight, I have no desire. Next birthday was I was 33, and I thought, you know what, it's time to go home. 25 years, you've done it. Pack it in. There's no one else out there other than Roy Jones.
Can I ask, and you don't have to tell me, of course, but I'm just curious. We're talking about Tyson Fury's next fight and the amount of money they're talking about. Of course, they're fighting over in Saudi. It's, you know, millions upon millions of pounds. When I'm not looking for specific numbers, but when you were fighting the likes of Chris Eubank or Nigel Benn, a ballpark figure, what type of money would you earn for a night's boxing?
My first title fight I got against Mike McCallum, who to me was one of the greatest middleweights of his era in boxing, any era really. I got $20,000. I thought I was a millionaire, and I put a deposit on a house on the outskirts of Dublin. I says, if this fails, I'll have a home. Yeah, and I've got something to come out of the game. That's the level we were at. Chris Eubank, I think Chris Pyatt, I don't know, but it's moving decimal points backwards. Of course. But people say, but it was good money then. I invested in property, and what I paid for my property then, you know, it's a lot less than it's worth now. But we earned a lot less then. But it was still, you know, we could still afford. I mean, I'm comfortable. I invested in property. I work hard. Investments have come good. I don't really spend money. It's there, you know, and I've invested well, and I'm okay. Good. But I work hard.
The division you were fighting in at that time, Steve, was because this is a topic that's coming around a lot at the moment, talking about the heavyweight division and all the why seemingly the best guys can't go in there toe to toe with each other. But that division, when you were fighting, when you were in your peak and your prime years, that was like seriously competitive. That division, wasn't it? There was some very, very good fighters out there along with you at that time, and you were all prepared to get it on. You said you couldn't get the Roy Jones one on at the end. Well, that was obviously a regret. But in the main, whenever these people were out there, you fought them. Yeah,
well, we did fight each other because we were making money to fight. We were getting well paid to fight each other. We could have fought other opponents, but the money was fighting the big names, and the big names at that time was myself, you know, Chris Eubank, Nigel Benn, And we, you know, if we gave each other rematches, which doesn't happen nowadays. I mean, when I fought Chris Eubank for the super middleweight title, I was middleweight champ. So for a while, I held both titles. I held both middleweight and super middleweight. I was a champion of both in both divisions for a period, and I had a choice to go middleweight or super middleweight. Middleweight, there was nothing happening, so I decided to vacate that. And the advisors were saying to me, "Oh, you know, have a couple of easy fights, fatten up your bank account, and then do something, you know, fight a big name." And I said, "No." I said, "Chris Eubank is whinging and bitching about the decision. I'm giving him an immediate rematch." Which people say, "Well, that's a bit crazy because it's a tough fight. You can make money having easier fights." And I said, "No, that's not how I want to do it." And my fight against Eubank was my title fight. My first defense was a rematch with him. In the meantime, he took 2 or 3 fights, easy paydays against young South American guys who are very limited because he was more interested in the money. I could have done the same, but I said, no, it doesn't appeal to me. I need a challenge, and I will give him a defense because I have to shut him up once and for all.
Can I take you back to that Eubank fight? Because lots was said about the fact you had a hypnotist. I know that Chris Eubank wasn't a fan of your methods in the build-up to that fight. Have a listen to this.
I wanted to call a fight off. That's why I would call a fight off if I could now, because I'm going into unknown territory. The 43 fights I've had in the past, I've always known what I was dealing with. I don't know what I'm dealing with tonight. I'm fighting someone who is mechanically orientated, and that is just an unknown area. It's not fair that I should be put into this situation.
Now, my recollection of this as a kid watching this fight is that you told us all.
Am I that old?
Well, I wanted to sound like I'm younger than you. But, there's a few years. Be fair, I'm not going to argue with anything you say this afternoon. But I remember from that fight that you said you were hypnotised to not feel pain, and then I remember you sitting in your corner with your headphones on and like a towel over your head. But then I'm sure I remember afterwards you came out and said that was just all a load of nonsense just to get into his head. So what is the real story behind that?
I was scared of him. Chris Eubank was always a master of mind games. You know, he was a great fighter, but he always had the edge. Everybody showed up for the Chris Eubank show. So I had to take that away from him, and I had to make it my show. So, you know, for the first time in Chris Eubank's life, when he entered the ring, he was looking at me. It was always about him, but it became about me then. So I took the psychological edge away. I scared him. He thought he was fighting a machine. I did scare him, and it worked. But when the bell rang and he started throwing punches, you know, it was real then. So yeah, I did upset him.
Did you have a hypnotist?
Oh yes,
you did.
Well, a hypnotist is a psychologist, is a sports psychologist.
There's lots of them around now.
I discovered, you know, I done weight training in boxing when no one done it. I was open to try different things. I done, you know, and then I brought in and I discovered psychology. An example was I was in the gym in Brockton, watching this. We had this young kid in the gym, a lightweight, and this guy in the gym was unbeatable. Contenders would come to the gym and spar him, and he'd take him to school. He'd teach him lessons in the boxing ring. Come fight night, his lips would go blue, he'd freeze, and he'd get knocked out by an opponent. I'd look at him and say, what's going on here? It's the mind that's leading the body. The strength and the power is in the mind, because this guy has all the talent to be great, but something happens in his switch in his brain, something happens and it ruins it for him. So I thought, this is where it is. So if you get someone going in and undermine them and make them believe that in against something, a giant, and you know, they will actually believe that, and they'll accept defeat almost before they get it. And I learned this from watching Chris Eubank. I knew he was going to be an opponent of mine one day before I won the world title, and I was based in the UK at the time, and I went to one of his fights and I sat ringside and I watched his opponent enter the ring, one of his easy paydays. I think he was an Argentinian guy, you know, cannon fodder. This guy was led in. Everyone booed him, you know, the whole lot. He sat in his corner with his coaches behind him, standing up. And on the giant screen around the ring, it came alive. And you could see these images of Chris Eubank knocking people out. And the sounds, Chris Eubank throw a punch, he hit someone with the punch, he go boom. You know, it was like watching King Kong. It was like watching a monster killing a giant on television, killing all these little opponents, you know, and this guy's sitting in the corner looking up at that and he's going, oh my God, this is what I'm fighting, you know. And then the music began, which I have to say, he's the greatest entrance in boxing. And Chris's entrance would begin and the whole people would start singing Simply the Best. And I'm watching all this and I know what's going on. This guy realises it's not his show. He's just here to play a part. This is all about Chris Eubank. When Chris Eubank's music is playing, everyone's dancing. Even the guy's opponents were in the corner moving to Simply the Best. And I went, I got to take this away from him. I got to remove this advantage for him and undermine him. If I take this away from him, I'll have the psychological edge in the fight.
talkSPORT Drive with Andy Goldstein. Monday to Friday afternoon from 4 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.